Introductions, and then we're going to jump right into our discussion around the Family Justice Center. Also want to welcome back to the team Emily Kunze, who's going to be working with our committee going forward, in addition to the folks who have been up to now. So welcome back, Emily. We are glad to have you. We'll start with introductions with the folks in the room, and then committee members online, other council members online, and anybody else online. So I'm Larkin Eggleston. I am the committee chair.
Federico Rios, Office of Equity, Mobility, and Immigrant Integration.
Victoria Johnson, City Manager's Office.
Emily Kunze, City Manager's Office and Staff Resource.
Denata Jackson, Office of Constituent Services.
Marie Harris with Strategy and Budget.
You don't have to hold that thing. Committee members online.
Renee Johnson, District 4.
Victoria Watlington, District 3.
Greg Phipps at large, committee member.
I believe Ms. Ajmera will be joining us shortly. She is also on the committee, and I know we have at least one council member guest joining us today.
Braxton Winston at large.
Thank you for being here, Mr. Winston, and any other staff or guests we have on the WebEx.
Hi, Lauren Rivacaba, Strategy and Budget.
I think most of the others might be on as technical support. So without further ado, Ms. Kunze, you are on the agenda for an overview. Is there anything you wanted to cover before we jump into the Family Justice Center discussion?
No, we can go ahead and proceed with Marie's presentation.
All right, so Marie Harris is going to lead us through this conversation, and Mr. Phipps had asked me right before the meeting started, the presentation that we're about to get on the Family Justice Center does refer to a $10 million request that the organizations had made to the city to support this idea of a Family Justice Center. There have been some informal discussions had with myself, others, I guess including Mr. Phipps, because he asked the same question I had, which is, why does it refer to a $10 million ask instead of a $5 million ask, which some of us have informally been told would potentially be a sufficient investment from the city to bring this idea to fruition. However, that ask, the $5 million version of that ask, has not officially been made to the city. And so right now, the presentation reflects the most recent and I guess only number that has been officially asked of the city. Anything else would probably need to be submitted officially to be considered the new ask, but informally those conversations have taken place, and there is some thought that 5 million could be an option. So when you see that discrepancy in the presentation, that's why. Ms. Harris?
Thank you. And so, again, good afternoon, everyone. And again, just as a reminder, actually back in December, the city received through the Bay Area Council, I believe, a funding request, from Safe Alliance and some of the other partners that Mr. Eggleston just mentioned. And apparently the amount may be in flux, but that's what initially spun this, the report to look into this request. And then the mayor had made a referral to the Safe Communities Committee to look into it, and then the Safe Communities Committee tasked the budget and effectiveness to look into this request and just provide some additional information to you as you consider this request. And the Family Justice Service Model, we really looked into that a lot and again, before I get started too far, I don't want to forget to mention Lauren Rubalcaba-Stegall, who's on the call, was the lead researcher for this report, as well as Chris Thaxton, and they pulled in a couple other budget analysts. But again, it is a proven service model nationally. I believe starting in 2003 was really getting federal attention and funding from the federal government. And as the community, the city, the county, and our service partners are looking at violence prevention strategies and looking at how this may fit into the portfolio of services and additional information just for you to consider as you're assessing that need. And then next slide, please, Britt. Next slide, please, Britt. Thank you. And again, just this service model, we were first going to talk about how this may fit into the current initiatives underway with the city. And again, you've seen a lot, and this is what you're supporting as part of your violence reduction strategy, intergovernmental collaboration, community collaboration in priority areas, interrupt violence, invest in community-led efforts, and use data evidence. So that's really the building blocks that the city and county and other partners have rallied around to start attacking violence and reduce crime. Next slide, please, Britt. And this is just an inventory, and you heard a lot about these, I believe, last night as well. A reminder of current initiatives underway in this area. The Community Development Dashboard, which also partners with these initiatives by providing real-time data on what types of calls of services we're getting, demographics in the city. This is a good tool that you can use to look at the trends and the needs across the city and monitor how initiatives are potentially making an impact. We also have violence interruption programs where we're working with the county and other partners to look at training up community volunteers and community, and then making them part of this program, people that are already active in the community, and teaching them how maybe to interact with their community in a different type of way targeted towards interrupting the cycle of violence. We also have Save Charlotte grant program where it's $1 million is designated to be distributed out to different nonprofits, and these nonprofits have to demonstrate how they are working to reduce violence. And I believe we just announced 17 of those organizations that are receiving part of that grant. And there's also a current initiative we have going with Atrium and other partners. It's a hospital-based interruption program where you look at people that are coming into emergency rooms and trying to interject and look at how we can reach out to them to potentially break that cycle of violence and assess their situations. Next slide, please, Britt. And then also a current direct service we're partnering with is Safe Alliance. They're currently in FY21 one of our financial partners, and we partner with them specifically around this initiatives around domestic violence, about helping file protective orders, the Sexual Trauma Resource Center, Domestic Violence Shelter, their Hope Line, and a myriad of other case management type services that Safe Alliance provides. So they are one of our existing partners. Next slide, please, Britt. We've gotten a lot. Again, just a reminder of there's a Survivor Resource Center currently in place. And as they said, this isn't like a pilot. This is a separate that they're wanting to evolve into the umbrella center. But right now they're referral based, and that's one of the key differences as well as what partners and their capacity to house additional partners on site. But here's a listing of the current partners and their other off-site partners that work with them at the Survivor Resource Center. And the city's participation in there is we provide just over $70,000 a year as a lease, and then we have touchdown area spaces for 4 of the police staff to rotate in that center. So we participate right now on site with police resources. Next slide, please, Britt. And key findings and considerations. Now, since we've since December, I think it's even after that, this Mecklenburg County has recently created an Office of Violence Prevention, and I believe the city's reaching out and working with them on a lot of key initiatives and continue to see how we can partner further with them. The county's led this. It's really important because the county's core services and areas are really aligned with a lot of the human services type functions, and it's a good consideration to keep them as the lead in those kind of areas. That's more in their expertise, and it's a community support services division of the health department. Currently in FY21, part of their work plan includes monitoring and reporting back on the successes and challenges of the current Survivor Resource Center, and that'd be an important piece of information for us to work with them to review to assess further how we, advance this concept into a family justice center for our area. And sorry, go back, Britt. I'm sorry I didn't touch that last one. And for the benchmarking, this is a model, again, national proven model, widely used across the nation. There's varied levels of support, and if you look at your report, and I know that you just got this report, so this is just so you're not getting the report cold. You have some context to it, but you can definitely look through it and then follow up, with different follow-up questions you may have. But there's a lot of benchmark research in there about the current models across the nation and kind of lessons learned from them and ones that are currently in place in North Carolina. But there's a wide variety. Some are their own nonprofit, others are part of a department of the county or the city. And one of the main points of that is collaboration. We have a lot of resources, nonprofits, Mecklenburg County, the city. Another point is the small towns and what they're currently doing within Mecklenburg County and how we can leverage all those together. And that was the main, of course, thing is the collaboration and strengthening collaboration by having them housed in one area. Next slide, Brett, please. And the recommendations, the next step would be to follow up in collaborating with the county and the other municipalities. Again, a lot of the models we saw had, it really truly was a one-stop shop. If you were in whatever town within the county, they were all housed and they could all be serviced in the same location. Continue to collaborate with the Survivors Resource and explore options for expansion. One thing that was even looked at is, and I didn't really touch on this, but what facilities the city already has in place. Right now the Children and Family Services Center owns the space where the Survivors Resource Center really is currently housed. And I was just looking at it today, refreshing myself on this topic, and there's space available still that they could even expand within the existing building as well, their footprint there. So that's something that could be looked at and really assess. And, this is just additional information for you as you assess the priority of this Family Justice Center in line with all the other violence prevention efforts and things that need funding. And again, I believe Ms. Johnson and others mentioned about, okay, COVID's happened. You know, what lessons can we learn as far as streamlining services and making people together when they're not really together, like having a caseworker sit and log in with the person once they come in. So even if there's an outside partner, they can log in and have a WebEx meeting with one of the outside partners and be guided through with their caseworker, just different options like that to explore. And with that, I'll conclude and see if there's any other questions you have for right now, but definitely when you look through the report or anything else that would be helpful as y'all assess the requests and options moving forward, definitely let us know.
Thank you, Ms. Harris. If any of our committee members or council members have questions, then we'll raise their hand in the chat. I see Ms. Johnson's hand first. Ms. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Marie. I do have a question about the current Survivor Resource Center. Can you go back to that slide, please?
Britt, I believe it's slide 7.
That's it.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, they've got it up on the web.
So the on-site providers, all of these providers are currently at the Children's Justice Center on 5th Street, right?
Yeah. Yes, ma'am. That's what we pulled from the information provided by Safe Alliance.
Ms. Johnson, if you could speak up just a smidge, we're having a little trouble hearing you in the room here.
Thank you. Can you hear me better now?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay. So the difference in the current model and the proposed model would be the current off-site providers would be on-site in the new building that's proposed.
So, Ms. Johnson, I'm sorry, I don't know off the top of my head all the ones. There may be additional beyond those. And I believe I did look over the packet of information provided by Safe Alliance and the Q&As they provide you. And I'm not sure if that's exhaustive list, those off-site partners, or there may have been some other ones. But yes, they did have space for many of those providers, and we can get that back to you too.
Okay, and it might be answered in the presentation. And then at the bottom it says the city currently pays $71,000 per year, and that's just the space for CMPD.
Yes, ma'am.
Is that okay? All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
That was all from Ms. Johnson. Do we have any questions from Ms. Watlington, Mr. Phipps, Mr. Winston? I see Mr. Phipps.
Yes, I was wondering, I know I was privy to some of these early meetings when the Family Justice Center was being discussed in Charlotte, Mecklenburg. I know that they had a delegation of several members. I think it was 17 to 20 people went to Nashville to look at their model. I don't know who all went on that trip or anything, but in your review of what you're bringing back to us today, did you have occasion to touch base with Safe Alliance people to get any updates on, like for instance, the potential revision to their request or other components that might have been adjusted as a result of the first meeting that was held back in February 2nd?
No, sir. We were just going off providing the committee with additional information on the request that was currently in place. But no, sir, we did not go back and follow up with Safe Alliance beyond all the information they've sent.
It seems to me that would have been most helpful in bringing us some up to date perspectives at this meeting.
Mr. Phipps, I think Ms. Victoria Johnson has got something to add to that.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Phipps, last week Karen Parker did reach out to me and ask me, did we need anything and would they be allowed to be here or anything else? At no time during that communication with her last week did she make any request or any thoughts of lowering it to what supposedly the 5 million or anything like that. The only thing she asked me was, did we need her to be here? They didn't. Now, no one from there contacted the city. They did talk to council members, I believe, and the 5 million came up, but at no time, and I have spoken to different people that's a part of the organization, Mr. Kimball, I had a brief conversation with him, and Karen Parker, and at no time did any of them say, hey, we have another request, and we wanted to lower our request at that time. So the only thing we had to go off was the February request, because that was the official request that they put in.
And Ms. Harris?
Thanks. And Mr. Phipps, I believe this information will be helpful to the committee regardless of the request amount. You know, and as you now have an idea of a different amount, if that changes any of the information you need, or you need us to follow up on any of this information, please let us know. But I think regardless of the amount, this is good, just foundational information for you to have.
Yeah, I also understand that in the initial request they were thinking about a new standalone building, but I even think that even now that they might even be looking at maybe some existing structures that they could retrofit to be able to accommodate such a facility. Have you not heard any other information in that regard as well?
So, Mr. Phipps, I think it sounds like you've had similar conversations to ones that I've had with some of the stakeholders involved in this conversation. And I think the point that Ms. Johnson was making is that no one individual talking to me, talking to you, talking to whoever can change the formal request that was made. It would need to be, if there is a difference, and I have heard some of the same ones you have, it wouldn't necessarily have to be a new building. It wouldn't necessarily have to be uptown. It wouldn't necessarily have to be $10 million, but I think that's the request that was made from that coalition to the city, and I think that we would need a formal, different request made by that same coalition as opposed to the individual conversations that are taking place, and I'm appreciative of their being flexible and trying to find a way to make this work differently, and I think that would be necessary. But to know that all of those entities were on the same page with that change in the formal request, I think it would have to come in more of a formal manner.
Okay, so I guess we're basically saying that even leading up to this meeting was no indication as to whether or not that a request should be made of them to provide an updated request for information. So we're just bringing it up here now as something that we would want them to do.
Well, I checked as early or as recent as an hour ago, and it was confirmed that the $5 million request, which I know is one of the big ticket items that we discussed that would maybe need to be different, was not yet an official change in position in terms of their ask. So I think it's hard to work off of, and I think the point Ms. Harris made earlier, though maybe more lightly than I'll say, is I don't know that $5 million change necessarily changes staff's recommendation, and I'm getting a nod in the affirmative that would not necessarily change staff's recommendation. So I think it certainly can weigh into whatever feelings, thoughts, questions council has, but I don't think that would have materially changed the final slide of this presentation.
Okay. Another question I have is in regards to CMPD, I guess, participation within the center itself. I think they had, I thought I saw something. A number of detectives and things that would be on.
Mr. Phipps, your dial-up internet's acting up on you again. All right, we're going to come back to Mr. Phipps. I got Ms. Watlington next.
So shady, so shady. I have two questions. First one is...
Mr. Phipps, we're going to come back to you once we feel confident you've resolved your issues.
What, you don't think is my computer not working right? Can you not hear me?
Well, we can now, so we'll give you another chance.
Yeah, I was wondering about the CMPD allotment of personnel. Has that been more or less confirmed? I mean, is that some?
All right, Mr. Phipps, you cut off temporarily.
I think I know where he's.
Ms. Harris is going to attempt to answer the question.
Of CMPD.
Okay, Mr. Phipps, I'm sorry you keep freezing on us, but I believe I know what you're asking. Currently, there's space we're renting. Okay, Mr. Larkin told me I don't have to hold it. It's my little teddy bear. There's currently space there that we're renting for 4, and I did see in the follow-up information, I think Ms. Johnson forwarded me some follow-up information that had like 53. And no, that ain't confirmed, but that's, great, and I remember, I think they did say it would be rent-free, so I did check when I saw that figure with the chief, and he wasn't aware of it, but, that would, he was open to it for sure. But no, there hadn't been a confirmed that we're going to have 53 in the new center, because the design of the new center hadn't been totally confirmed yet. But I believe that's the vision of the Safe Alliance.
Thank you.
All right, and I did want to acknowledge before Ms. Watlington asks her questions that Ms. Ajmera is with us now. Welcome, Ms. Ajmera. Ms. Watlington, your questions?
Yeah, so too, and they're a little bit different now that I've heard that, because I asked the same question, because I know that previously we had spoken about this, and I asked specifically what the numbers were, and it sounded like there was a discrepancy between what was agreed upon and what was in the proposal. But then last week I understood from the chief that there would be 53 officers. So as I'm listening to the conversation, I think holistically what it sounds like is what we have on the table right now, staff has a recommendation. What the committee or the steering committee chooses to bring back to us is, of course, up to their discretion. But currently what we're addressing is the original ask based on the original model. So I'm curious to know if we have any preliminary metrics from the Survivor Resource Center since it has been opened up. I know that the fundamental premise, if you will, is that we would see a reduction in violence because survivors are able to get assistance or to get better assistance. And so I would think that would reduce the number of incidents associated with domestic violence. So what I'd like to understand is if there's been any preliminary information or data back.
And before you guys respond to that, can we get the slide back up that has the recommendations, the final slide of the presentation while we're having this discussion? Thank you. Yeah, okay, so everybody on the WebEx should be able to see that. All right, whoever wanted to field Ms. Watlington's question there.
And I believe that might have been in some of your material by the Safe Alliance. Also, we were looking at with the county, when we were looking into the current initiatives that have in place, that was one of the work plan items from the Community Support Services group within the county, that they were going to assess their successes and challenges and do a report at the end of the fiscal year. So that should have additional information as well, but we can go back through the packets and the information or request new information and provide that to you.
That's okay. It sounds like we won't have it for a couple of months. I think we can wait on that if it's going to be more robust information. I think that's the information we'll need to know how much more investment to make, or at least that's the information the steering team would need to be able to assess how to scale up, and then they can come back with a recommendation that fits that request.
All good, Ms. Watlington? Mr. Winston?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, why is there not a representative from the Umbrella Center group here, part of this committee meeting, to be able to answer questions and have a better discussion around this?
So, Mr. Winston, this is just The purpose of this is just to give you the background information, and then you could have follow-up with them or with, us to come back or provide additional information. This is just kind of, but I didn't want to give you this report and this information cold, so it was really, this is staff's report based on the task you asked us to do. So that was my agenda item for today, was just to introduce to you the report and the background information.
Okay, so there seems to be a sort of, idea here that staff does not have the discretion to make recommendations that are different than the amount requested by staff, by our partner organizations. Is that the kind of what we're trying to kind of put out there, that since they haven't adjusted their requests, that we are incapable of making a recommendation of a different request that we think is appropriate?
Mr. Winston, if I could speak, I'm not sure if you're talking about for the committee work or for the report. No, just the point was, this is background information. It wouldn't matter if it was 15 million or 2 million. This is background information and considerations regardless of the amount.
I think Mr. Winston's question is maybe more if part of the recommendation is that staff either, and Mr. Winston, tell me if I'm on track here, if part of the recommendation is that we don't think $10 million is the right amount because we don't feel like we have $10 million in the budget to do that, or if we feel like that's too expensive. If the request was $100,000 for the sake of the argument, you might say that we should move forward with it. So I guess Mr. Winston's question sounded to me like, would staff have potentially come back and said no to the $10 million, but yes to X amount? That would be.
Yes, exactly. Because, we received the budget recommendation from the manager yesterday, and I can tell you from a fact-based position that there were several partner organizations that got far less than they requested. So I don't know. I'm trying to square this part of the conversation about why they would need to change that amount, and why we wouldn't just, as Mr. Eggleston eloquently said, provide the recommendation that makes most sense to us fiscally.
Would you potentially come back to us with a recommendation saying we don't believe this amount makes sense, but we think there's value in what these groups are seeking to do, and we believe that it would make sense for the city to contribute this different, lesser amount?
No, sir, but there's definitely value in what these groups are trying to do. The issue is, proof of concept, more collaboration with our other partners such as the county, and that you're mentioning they might have a different kind of role than previously just given $10 million. But no, yeah, there's definitely value in it. It's one that it's just gone through a different type of process. So it's being assessed kind of differently as well. But also, I lost my point there. But I mean, it wouldn't have mattered. We wouldn't have said another type of money at all without having the collaboration piece.
So, Mr. Winston, I think the moral to me of that is that it's going to be incumbent on us as council members to have the conversations with the stakeholders who are bringing this forward to iron out what that amount could be if there is an amount that we want to change the model.
That's kind of what I'm getting at. I think there have been some legitimate concerns that I've heard from a funding standpoint, from our point of view, from the city's point of view. For instance, from a $10 million standpoint, and if that is a similar amount from the county, that could be seen as a double tax for the residents of Charlotte, right? Because they are paying in through their city portion as well as their county portion. But I would like to, for those specifics not to just happen in conversations behind the scenes, but for those kind of facts to be put out there in public so that we can kind of work through these things, right? That's a legitimate reason why $10 million might not be appropriate, but we have not put out there what could be a more appropriate equation to follow here. And I think that's important. And that kind of gets down to kind of what I see here. I think this is a very weak recommendation from staff. I think the point number one is basically government speak for kicking the can down the road. We have a proof of concept here. We always talk about relying on experts, but we have so many experts that have been telling us and showing us and providing the type of data to show that, one, you're not necessarily looking for a marginal increase of violence necessarily, because as we have a growing city, that's not necessarily how the proportions are going to work. This is about service, providing the types of municipal services that we have to provide and making that easier, making that more efficient, and making that more effective overall. And these models have all of the data to show for it. It is also disconcerting that, in hearing these staff recommendations, a lot of the energy is being put on others, is kind of pointing the other way, especially towards the county. Make no mistake about it. This is an issue of local community public safety, and that is our responsibility. We can't look towards other. Yes, it does involve and engage other folks, but we need to really be looking at this from a public safety standpoint, and not necessarily the human services standpoint that is part of it, but is a separate issue outside of ours. So I think this is weak. It kind of doesn't take into consideration, and in fact tries to cover up and ignore the work, data, and expertise that is going on in this and going on behind this. I will also say that I would encourage, I will also say from a personal standpoint that I did sign a letter as a council member to send to our Congresswoman Alma Adams' office to encourage her to put this on the list for the markups that are going to be part of future congressional spending. I would encourage all of my colleagues to do the same, and if you'd like a template, I'm happy to share that with you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Winston. I would expect after the conversation we're having today that we will see a different formal recommendation brought forward from all of these entities, because it seems clear that, again, there have been these individual conversations where there is some flexibility on some of the points that I think might be the hang-ups for the city to be involved in this in the current way that it's been presented to us. But as I said earlier, I do think that will need to come from them as a body, not through individual conversations, and I would expect that we'll get that in short order after. I'm sure they're tuned in with us today and hearing this conversation. Ms. Ajmera, I saw your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize if my question has already been addressed earlier. I was running late, but I wanted to ask if there was a commitment that's been made by Mecklenburg County in terms of specific amount for this project. I did not see that as I'm going through slides here.
So, Ms. Ajmir, our initial request that came to us, to the city, also referenced a request to Mecklenburg County for $10 million. I'm hearing, I don't know if there's been an updated request. I'm hearing there's been an upgraded request informally to the city. But no, we don't know of any committed funds. I believe the county's this Thursday presenting their budget. So we definitely should know by the end of the week. But no, ma'am, I'm not aware of any committed funds from the county.
Got it. So I think as we go through this process, it would be important to know what is the commitment that county is making. Because it's a $10 million ask from both city and county combined. So I'm just interested in seeing the progress that the county is making, and then so we know what to expect from the city side and how that balances with other priorities that we have. So.
And Ms. Ajmera, the volume in here is a little low, so I might have misheard you, but it sounded like you said $10 million combined. The original ask was $10 million from the city and $10 million from the county for a $20 million combined ask. And to Ms. Harris's point, I don't think there has been firm commitment yet from the county for that or any other specific amount, though I imagine that'll be taken up in their forthcoming budget meeting. Do you have anything else? Go ahead.
No, I guess she did answer my question. We just have to wait and see what Mecklenburg County commits to from their side. So we'll find out, I guess, later this week.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Ms. Johnson, I see your hand back up.
Thank you. I do have a few more questions for Ms. Harris. Ms. Harris, what will be the next step before a decision can be made? Are we expecting a more formal request from the parties, such as an MOU or the data or the metrics, like Councilmember Watlington referred to?
No, ma'am. From my perspective, the committee tasked the budget office with providing some additional foundational information as you assess the request. And again, we were talking about earlier, there's no doubt that it's a worthy cause, but then you prioritize it with your other causes and how, regardless of the amount, how fund it now, fund it later. So it's really at the committee's, what the committee wants to recommend to full council from now.
So would we request a budget and just different documentation? I just think from a nonprofit perspective, when a nonprofit is seeking funding, there's lots of data that's required for much smaller amounts than 10 or 5, 10 or $20 million. So I'm wondering what that process is. I would like to see an MOU, the commitment from the county, the metrics, and just a lot more data. I'd also like to know who will be the owner of the real estate. Which entity would own the 100,000 square foot building?
So, Ms. Johnson, I'm not aware of that. Originally, they're a nonprofit, and originally I believe the nonprofit was seeking to get capital money to build a facility. And from there, I'm not sure, because I'm hearing from Mr. Eggleston that they're looking at other options, like potentially being housed in a government facility or renovating an existing facility. So I'm not aware of it, the exact plan.
And
so the nonprofit.
I'm sorry, Ms. Johnson. This is Victoria Johnson. From their presentation, it was said that the county would maintain the facility and any ongoing maintenance that it would need. That was a part of their original presentation that they made, and I think that was one of the questions that you asked as a follow-up, and that they answered, that this county would, I thought at one point they said own, operate, and maintain the building. Don't know if that's the same now, but that was what the original was.
I've been told from members of the group, the county has agreed to maintain and own the building.
Right. So.
Ms. Johnson, Ms. Renee Johnson, informal conversations that I've had, and I'm sure others have too, I think they have expressed an open-mindedness to different arrangements as it relates to the real estate, both location, type of facility, things like that. So I think that might not be entirely set in stone. I think they're looking for an opportunity that they think makes sense in terms of proximity and fit for what they're trying to do.
Well, that's definitely a question that we need a definite answer to. So if the county and the city are collaborating and the county is going to own the building, I think this is an opportunity. Or areas that we say that are priorities for development instead of the prime real estate opportunity. So I think that's a question or concern I would have, the location. And also, if there is another building that's available that's not utilized, especially in the wake of the pandemic, if there's a building that could be utilized, like I expressed the last time. Let me go back a second. Last night in the budget meeting, Marcus Jones presented a very impressive budget for the city. And that was done with most of the staff working virtually. And he said that we were able to operate effectively and efficiently with this new model. So I just, reiterate that that is an option that we can take a look at, virtual supports, and really consider the contribution of such a large amount. We need to know, who's going to own the building, because yes, we all have, human services is a priority, but at the end of the day, this is for the city. This is a real estate deal. I also wanted to ask about the other towns providing financial support. During the presentation, it was stated that other towns would utilize the facility. So are the other towns that would utilize the building, are they being asked for support of the initiative also? And then, if I didn't say this, is leasing an option? So those are my questions.
So, Ms. Johnson, as far as the other towns, based on the recommendation that was brought, it was only $10 million from the city, $10 million from the county, and $15 million raised by the privates. There was no other town that was listed that was asked to contribute based on their presentation.
Though indirectly, the towns contribute to the county tax base, so that could be looked at in that way, but I think there could potentially be the opportunity for the other municipalities themselves, their local governments, their municipal governments to participate as well, though obviously I think the intention is for the facility to be somewhere in or around Center City, so it might not be viewed as proximate for residents of the towns. But
well, that was stated in the presentation that other towns would utilize, or their residents would utilize the facility. And why Uptown the desired location? Was there a logic behind that?
well, for one, proximity to other government facilities, the courthouse, as well as obviously a concentration of transit corridors coming through Uptown, I think would give access to the most people. Though again, in informal conversations, it's been expressed to me that there is not any sort of, they don't have their heels firmly dug in, that they have to be inside of 277, for instance. So I think that they want a central location so that it is accessible to the most people possible. But I don't think are entirely married to the idea that it must be Uptown.
Okay, well, hopefully my questions were clear. I'd like to know who, to be certain who's going to own the building. Will we be receiving more data, such as the MOU, the metrics, and any other data that any organization that would present when asking for this sum of money? And telehealth, is that an option? Is that being looked at to be most efficient and most effective in the operation?
Absolutely. And I think you and the rest of the entire committee, I think, have laid out some very clear questions. And again, I would expect that in short order we will see a follow-up from the entities that are working together on this, that both potentially changes the formal request of the city, but also addresses the concerns that you and others have outlined today. I'm not seeing any other hands. Does anybody have?
My hand is up.
Oh, I'm sorry. It isn't showing, but go. Oh, and now they're popping back up. Who said it? Was that Ms. Watlington?
Yeah.
Ms. Watlington, go ahead.
I don't know what happened to my hand. But no, I think Ms. Johnson hit most of what I was going to say. At the end of the day, I just want to make sure. I think the conversation that we've had today and the fact that we are directing questions to staff who's doing a good job trying to field them based on the information they have, but I think that speaks to a need for more clarity about the proposal and about the implementation of the proposal. This, to be clear, City of Charlotte residents pay Mecklenburg County as well. So to ask, to Mr. Winston's point, for a double tax. I think it is not different in Charlotte as it would be for the other towns. So I do think there's an opportunity for all of Mecklenburg County to get on board with this. But also, I think what I heard from staff, and I want to make sure that I understand, because based on some of the conversation we've had since then, I think some people are under the impression that this is about the amount of money, whereas I understood it that, or what I'm seeing on the screen is that the question is not so much about how much, but about the what of the proposal. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. From the budget office perspective, that's correct. This is just baseline information and considerations on collaborations regardless of the amount.
Okay, so then, yeah, I agree with Councilmember Johnson then, that definitely would need to see more information. What I would have loved to see from the steering committee is a decision tree, basically. If this is what we could do with a certain amount of money, this is what we could do with the largest ask. If it was a lower ask, this is what we could do. How does that impact the plan? Because I would imagine that they've got a backup plan and some sort of, I would hope, because we want to deliver the outcomes in the community. And so certainly we haven't hitched all of our hopes to one $10 million ask. So that's what I would like to see is the alternatives. Also, as I already mentioned and concur with Councilmember Johnson, water can be delivered through the Survivors Resource Center. I'm very intrigued that there's more space there and that we could conceivably move more resources over, or our partner organizations could move more resources over to that center and continue to deliver outcomes. I'd like to see a lot more structure around particular alternatives. That's all.
Thank you, Ms. Watlington. Ms. Ajmera?
Yes, so my question is along the same lines. I guess what are we trying to do here as a committee? I think the question is, in terms of the priority, where does this fall compared to other initiatives? I think funding and all that can be worked out depending on the alternatives, but I think as a committee we have to decide how important this is compared to other initiatives and the direction that city manager needs from this committee. So what is the staff looking for from this presentation or from us today?
Well, I think today there wasn't necessarily an assumption that there would be action taken, but I think it's been laid out by pretty much everyone on this call that they have questions that they'd like to get answered before we as a committee are able to hone in on how this helps us achieve our more overarching goals around public safety. And so I think it's in the hands of the committee and ultimately the council to determine where this falls in terms of priority, how this fits into our broader strategy. And I think the questions that y'all have all outlined that we are looking for answers from that stakeholder committee to answer those questions, I think will help us make those determinations.
Yes, I think it's good that we will get answers to all those questions. I'm also trying to understand what other community initiatives are out there that we need to look at when we are trying to assess the priority here. We do not know all the requests that have come in so far for public dollars, especially capital budget. So if we can also have that list so we know when it comes to public safety, here are all other initiatives that we need to assess and compare all the funding requests.
Yeah, in pages 5 or slides 5, 6, and 7 on our presentation, some of that's outlined, but I think to your point, we can get maybe a more detailed summary of all of the different efforts and strategies that we're undertaking.
Yeah, I guess what I'm looking for is that each request that comes in, how does it help us further our goals? So having more details around, okay, here is this organization helping us with X, Y, and Z when it comes to our city goals. I think that's what I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Thank
Mr. Phipps?
Yes, I mean, I'm looking at this as an attempt to house in one location all of the services needed to handle abuse victims subject to domestic violence and such. I mean, this was an initiative that I guess predates some of the initiatives that we have currently put in place to handle some of the violence situations we have. In my reading, not just from material from the city, but in reading other information broadly available in the media through the Charlotte Business Journal and such as that, there seems to be a lot more information and more, I guess, more descriptive evaluation of what we're trying to do with this umbrella center that's out there that we probably need as a part of this committee to refocus what we're trying to do with this Family Justice Center. Why is it considered important enough that we had a delegation to go and visit other cities to determine how they approach their center and the model that they use, and even some localities in North Carolina, Greensboro or Asheville, how did they get that Family Justice Center one-stop shop in place? I really do think that the county is probably further along than it appears that we are in their evaluation of, whether or not to participate in this endeavor, and they're probably looking at the city as well to see what will be our potential participation. Just like we are seeing from this meeting, we're trying to determine what the county's participation will be. But I would suggest that they might be a little further along than we are. So if there is a need to regroup, to come back with more clarifying proposal or more clarifying information as to what we're trying to do, how we can integrate all of these programs into one entity to be able to conveniently and efficiently service the clientele that we're trying to do, I think that we should do that as soon as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Phipps. Mr. Winston?
Yeah, I agree with Mr. Phipps. I mean, look, at some point in time, we have to make a decision. We have to say yes or no. We don't think this is worth it, or yes, we do think it's worth it. We've been gathering this data for the past 3.5 years that I've been on council, and I think Mr. Phipps is saying it even longer than that. We haven't talked to. We're saying that we need more data, more information, but we haven't invited the people that have the information to our actual meeting. Just like Mr. Bakari brought developers to the workforce development meeting a couple weeks ago. If we truly were trying to get there, we would be going about this in a quite different way. And it just feels like we don't want to have the kind of political fallout to say that we don't think this is a priority. But all the writing on the wall over the past couple of years and the way that we've been dealing with this pretty much says that. So I'm getting a little bit tired of this kind of back and forth. At some point in time, we have to make a decision and get off the pot.
So back in February, that whole meeting was a presentation. I believe Ms. Johnson was in attendance, the chair, and Councilwoman Ajamir. At that time, Councilmember Phipps was being sworn in, and even Councilwoman Watlington was on, and they had an hour-long presentation. Not only did they have an hour-long presentation where they were asked questions, and if they couldn't give those answers, they even turned around and the next month sent follow-up answers to the questions that were posed. One of the questions that I know, because I remember reading about it, was Councilwoman Johnson says, why can't we do this virtually because we're in a new environment? And that was one of the questions that was even answered in their response. They have gone into an in-depth response, and we gave them all the time they need to come and do a presentation. Now, if what you're saying, and if the chair or if this committee feels the need that you want them to come back, not only, I guess my suggestion would be not only to have them back in the room, but to have the county in the room. So, therefore, no one's guessing about who's doing what, because I talked to the Assistant City Manager, Anthony Troutman, and at that time he said they didn't have anything that was set aside. That was several weeks ago, a couple of months ago. Don't know what happened since then. But if that's the will of this committee, then that's what can be on the agenda to go forward to actually thrash it. I hate to say thrash, but work through the hard issues and ask the questions that need to be asked and answered in order to get you to a place that you want to decide what do you want to do from that point.
Yeah, I don't think there's been a lack of opportunity for us to consider this, but I do think Mr. Winston has a point that at some juncture, sooner than later, we're going to just simply have to make a decision. And I think that the challenge has clearly been put out to the stakeholders in this effort that we need something more formal than a bunch of the individual conversations that have been taking place to come back and say, here is a revised request to the city. Here is the data that Ms. Johnson and others have asked for. Here are the answers to these questions about building ownership and what flexibility they have in terms of where it might be located, how it might be structured. All of the things that have been broached today need to be answered, and then I think Mr. Winston's right. We just simply have to make a decision. Is this going to be how we prioritize our dollars? Does this fit squarely enough in the model of what we are trying to do holistically around community safety that we're going to prioritize whatever amount of dollars that new request asks for to do it? And I think we do need to have the conversation with the county as well, but there has been the forum to have the conversations. We just at some point have to make a decision. Does anybody else have anything else before we wrap? And I will, if we need to have another discussion about this sooner than we would otherwise be scheduled, I think that can be accommodated, but I will know how could it be any more clear than it already is, but I will say that the sooner we can get all of that information back in a formal manner to the questions that have been raised today, the sooner we can consider what our next step is as a council and whether to move forward with this or not based on that new request. But informal requests can't really be considered, and so we will need that to come as from the whole group in a formal manner. Ms. Johnson, do you have something else?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment to Councilmember Winston, just respond to that. I understand what you're saying, and things do take a while, to process through City Council. But these questions, I think, are just responsible for the stewardship of taxpayer dollars. I mean, asking who the building is certainly an answer that we need, and an MOU, and these questions. Anytime a presentation is or a proposal is presented, you're going to ask details, or at least you should. And then these questions that we've asked, we're getting a presentation of the original presentation, so the information's not updated. So I understand what you're saying. I'm with you. We want more action and less talk and less committee, but these are questions that have to be answered. We approve dollars, $5-10 million, like it's just nothing. That's a lot of money, and we would not be doing the job that our voters elected us to do if we were not asking these questions. And I know that you agree with that. Thank you.
I appreciate everyone's time and passion around this issue today. We will hopefully get those questions answered in short order, and then we will move forward from there. If no one else has anything for the good of the group, I'll entertain a motion to close, and we'll go about our days.
I'll move.
Second.
All in favor can log off and have a wonderful rest of the afternoon.
Thanks.